Hello everyone and welcome to our very last woo, but also maybe sad but mostly woo video where we annotate Jekyll and Hyde. This is chapter 10 part 2, so let's just get straight into it. So we'll start here. My two natures had memory in common. This is important to know. This is how J and H function. Because I think as we're reading, there's always this confusion of who's in control. And we ask questions like, well, why does Hyde ever bother taking the potion to turn back into Jekyll if he's so evil? And this kind of does help to explain it in this second part of the chapter. Jekyll, who was composite, in other words, Jekyll is both good and evil, mostly good. But unfortunately Jekyll now has a greedy gusto projected and shared in the pleasures and advantages of Hyde. But Hyde was indifferent to Jekyll, remembered him as a mountain bandit, remembers the cavern in which he conceals himself from pursuit. So this is a metaphor. Oh no, it's a simile because they use the word as. My mistake. A simile showing that Hyde views Jekyll as nothing more than a disguise to get away with crimes. I had to squeeze that in there, sorry, so I'll just read it again. Hyde views Jekyll as nothing more than a disguise to get away with crimes, and this is why Hyde bothers taking the potion to turn into Jekyll. What's evil? Doing a crime. What's more evil? Having the know-how of how to get away with it so that you never pay for what you do. I'd say that's even more evil. That's why Hyde does go along with turning into Jekyll. Unfortunately, Jekyll, we get the hint here, slowly becoming more Hyde-like, or we could argue the Hyde side is taking over. Anyway, I've written this in black prior to this. It's here. Why do this? Why not allow Jekyll, in Stevenson's story, to make himself purely good and make Hyde purely bad? Well, we can't just sort of let Jekyll get away with it because it's all about the message of the book. What is he trying to teach readers by us reading it? And I think it's saying that giving into evil, even a little bit, even this experiment of being like, oh, let's see what it's like to do one evil thing, makes it corrupt entirely. So it's like that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's kind of what the message is with just generic evil. So the evil spreads like a disease. We'll see more of that later. Lovely. I'm going to go over to my other page here. Jekyll had more than a father's interest. Hyde had more than a son's indifference. So it's interesting the use of those familial words, because obviously father equals sort of the creator, son equals the product. And even though, you know, we've already said that no, Jekyll doesn't create Hyde, he more just reveals what was already there, it's kind of still working this whole father-son complex here. With Hyde being the son, it shows that he's less developed than Jekyll is, because he's younger, he's immature, he's impulsive. That's one key thing we know about teenagers. Much more likely to do something just because you want to do it and act before you do or say. Not all of you, but some. And it's you can't help it. It's your brain. Anyway, moving on. Yes, I preferred the elderly and discontented doctor, surrounded by friends, cherishing honest hopes, and bade a resolute farewell to the liberty, the comparative youth, the light-step, leaping impulses and secret pleasures that I had enjoyed in the disguise of Hyde. So this is where he decides to stay as Jekyll and decides to remain that way. But it's very revealing. Discontented, meaning unhappy. And, liberty, freedom, youth, light step, leaping impulses, pleasures. These are all positive and tempting attributes. So from this we can see implicitly the appeal of Hyde is strong. So we know that even though he's decided to remain as Jekyll, that's what he wants, he's going to be unhappy that way, and he's saying goodbye to all these things that he enjoys. So I wonder how long that will last. Well, we know already it doesn't last very long. I began to be tortured with the throes and longings as of Hyde struggling after freedom, and in an hour of moral weakness, Jekyll gives in. I'm sorry if you can hear that child screaming outside. I think, tortured is a very interesting verb, connoting pain and suffering. And this, I think, also gives the image of an addict. He is addicted to becoming Hyde, and this is kind of the withdrawal stage, where we know that if you do withdraw from especially things like alcohol or drugs and things like that, a chemical thing, it then has physical side effects of you feeling very, very ill, or it changes part of you, and that makes sort of weaning yourself off it all the more challenging, and that's clearly what's happening for Jekyll here. My devil had been long caged, he came out roaring, so in an hour of moral weakness he takes the potion, becomes Hyde. My devil, so we got that religious or anti-religious, let's say anti-religious imagery to describe Hyde. Caged, that's, let's call it zoomorphism. And it also shows a dangerous animal, especially from that word roaring as well, which is also zoomorphism. Birds don't roar because they're not dangerous. Lovely. Anyway, moving on. He then goes on to talk about him committing the Carew murder, but he never explicitly says it. He never explicitly said, that time I killed that bloke, or words to that effect. So never explicitly says it, but it's heavily implied that that is what he's talking about. So Jekyll clearly feels great shame and guilt because he can't talk about it directly. Shames? Just one shame. Shame and guilt. Instantly the spirit of hell awoke in me and raged. I mauled the unresisting body, tasting delight from every blow. This is him, beating Sir Danvers Carew. This is the act of the murder. The spirit of hell, again, the anti-religious imagery. Raged is a very interesting word to look at there. The sheer anger of the moment. I mauled. Mauled, I would also say, is zoomorphism. It is a way of eating something in that very animalistic, graphic way. It's quite grotesque as well. Tasting delight from every blow. This idea that Hyde enjoys inflicting pain, it is as good as eating a nice big juicy steak. Don't say that in your essay. But you get what I mean. He takes so much joy from it in the same sense of, doing anything delightful. On to the next page. I've noticed a pattern here. Before, Jekyll openly admits that man is not truly one but two. He says all along that him and Hyde are the same person. He makes a big thing of it in the opening of this chapter. He refers to himself as I, and that I did it in my own hand as Hyde. But now Hyde had a song upon his lips as he compounded the draught and as he drank it. So we see a change in pronouns. Jekyll distances himself from Hyde directly after murder. Why does he distance himself from Hyde? Maybe because Hyde is unhuman. Moment he commits murder. And then how does Jekyll respond to the situation? He turns back into Jekyll because Hyde wants to get away with the murder, so he needs to hide. Fallen to his knees and lifted his clasped hands up to God. It's interesting. He talks about himself in the third person here as well. That's interesting. Again, I think it's because he wants to distance himself from the situation as well as Hyde. He definitely wants to distance himself from that. But he wants to feel distanced from situation. He doesn't want to admit that it is technically him that committed this murder. He did that. That was a thing that was buried within him as a want to do. And here we see attempt for holy redemption. To be saved by God. That's kind of what he wants in this moment. Moving on to here. I was now confined to the better part of my existence. So after the murder, that's finally the last straw. And he decides no, can never go back to Hyde ever again. I embraced anew the restrictions of natural life. So normal and moral life as Jekyll, seen as restricting, as the word says there, but also prison-like. It's interesting. He feels like he's a slave to Hyde, but he also feels like a slave to the society that expects him to be this astronomically good person. And I think it's just too much pressure in both veins. And I think he wishes he could just have a little bit of both and have freedom that way. And also it links that confined has that same implication as well. So we've got sort of this semantic field really throughout of entrapment. But he is ultimately happy to be Jekyll again. Going on to my next page, and then I'm going down to the bottom of the page because I'm just following the yellow. Then I smiled, comparing myself with the other men. So Jekyll's in the park one day. This is just before he turns into Hyde for the last time. Well, no, not the last time, but this is the big moment. I smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill with the lazy cruelty of their neglect. In other words, Jekyll is saying, I am better than most people. Jekyll thinks he is better than others in terms of goodness, because he's saying everyone else sits around thinking they're good, but they're doing nothing actively good, and so they're not as good as they think they are, whereas I actively do things that makes me good. I'm not quite sure what he's thinking of. Maybe it's the fact he throws nice dinner parties for his friends, perhaps. But I haven't seen him doing any charity work. All I've done is see him murder a man in the street. I know that sounds Hyde, but that is part of him. But anyway, he calls it here, it's vainglorious. So it's extreme vanity and pride. Pride is the key word here, guys, because pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. And this causes the sudden transformation into Hyde. So Hyde sort of awakens on a moment of sin, whether that's pride, gluttony, greed, jealousy, anything like that. And Hyde then sort of gets woken up because, you know, he is such this devilish, sinful thing anyway. And let's look at this lovely description of the effect it has. A qualm came over me. He has nausea. He feels faint, shuddering. So, sickness. Hyde is a disease. And the key thing here, it spreads. Hyde is taking over. I was once more Edward Hyde. Now I was the common quarry of mankind, hunted, houseless, a no murderer, thralled to the gallows. So we got some nice listing here. This perhaps shows his panic when he is Hyde. And this is why, I've pre-written this, Hyde wants to change to Jekyll, because he knows that if he remains as Hyde in this park to be seen by everyone, and he's a wanted man, he will be thrown to the gallows, he will be publicly executed. So it's selfish, all of Hyde's reasons to want to turn back into Jekyll. And now we understand why he would want to do it anyway. Then just a reminder of the plot point here. This is why he has Lanyon. You know, he's outside in the park. He can't go back into his own house because the servants will see him and they all know who Hyde is and they call the police, and then what would he do then? And he'd be outnumbered. So he has to find a way to get into his lab, get the ingredients and get the potion to turn him back into Jekyll. The only person he can trust to do that is Lanyon. And then he writes the letters. Hyde, in danger of his life, was a creature new to me. Creature, just circle that. We've talked about this lot, so I won't bother annotating it. But again, that zoomorphism, that wanting to make him non-human. Shaken with inordinate anger, strung to the pitch of murder, lusting to inflict pain. Again, lust is one of the 7 deadly sins. And the fact he wants to inflict pain, like there's this extreme love for it, which is disturbing. And then we got a quote down here. He, I say, I cannot say, I, that child of hell, had nothing human, semicolon and all that. So we got that he again disassociates self from Hyde, because Hyde is inhuman. We can also look at that child of hell. We will see the devil and diabolical, it's a nice word, behaviour. Child equals that he's been grown and nurtured by hell itself. You could go further into that in your essay. Obviously, we all know that as a child, that's your formative years, and whatever you do as a child, that then sets you up for life. And if you're a child of hell, my God, when you become an adult, no turning back there. Absolutely awful. And then also we can look at the punctuation. Look at how broken it and disjointed it is. So discordant use of punctuation. Jekyll made uneasy by Hyde. This is a contrast to how happy he was to be Hyde to begin with. He kind of got a thrill and a joy out of it. Now that's very much changed by the end. Lovely. Next page. I still hated and feared the thought of the brute that slept within me. Let's go with the idea that he sleeps within him. So he's an ever-present threat. He's just dormant. Like with volcanoes, when they're dormant, when they're sleeping, they could go off at any moment, but you don't know when. And if anything, that keeps you more on edge. And Brute sort of shows just the danger of him. Next page. It took on this occasion a double dose to recall me to myself, and alas, 6 hours after, as I sat looking sadly into the fire, the pangs returned, and the drug had to be re-administered. He takes a double dose. So the yes, I know that in this moment he's trying to turn back into Jekyll, but it's taking more to turn him back. So this shows the addiction to potion is extreme. Because Hyde / evil can't... No, I don't want to say that. The addiction to the potion is extreme because Jekyll is becoming numb to its effects over time. What it could also show, another interpretation, is that Hyde is now too powerful because it takes more to get rid of him, and eventually we know that you won't be able to get rid of him at all unless Jekyll does something drastic, which he does. Moving on to the next page. The pangs of transformation grew daily less marked. So again, Hyde taking over. Like the transition between Jekyll and Hyde is now virtually non-existent. The powers of Hyde seem to have grown with the sickliness of Jekyll. For this, it's almost like Hyde is a disease and Jekyll is the host that incubates it. And Hyde has just been waiting to grow and take over all this time. On to my next page. Hyde's love of life is wonderful. So Hyde enjoys living. I know he fears my power to cut him off by suicide. I find it in my heart to pity him. He fears my power. Hyde wants control. We see this with people who are control freaks and who are, quite psychotic in that way. The one thing they fear and hate is when anyone else has any kind of power, no matter how small, no matter how extreme they would have to go to get that power. They're always going to be afraid of that because they're the ones who wants the control all the time. I find it in my heart to pity him. I'm still trying to think why he pities him, especially because he is a part of him. I want us to come back to that at the end as a class. That big question. So I'm going to put a big star there because I want us to come back to that as a group and discuss. And we're nearly there. I drank it and it was without efficiency. So now potion does not work. I am now persuaded that my first supply was impure and that it was that unknown impurity which lent efficacy, in other words, it works, to the draft. So this is an explanation of how he created this first potion, which, can you imagine if someone was actually able to make it? It kind of shows... it can never be made again because it was this one-off fluke. One of the ingredients in the batch Jekyll initially got for the potion that was successful and turned him into Hyde, he now realises was impure, and that's what made it work. And obviously he'll never get that again. So now he's sort of at a loss. I'm now finishing the statement under the influence of the last of the old powers. So now we know it's all coming to an end. And we see this in the last page. Here we go. This is my true hour of death. I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end. Now, I would argue that this is his suicide, and we could put in brackets, note that this whole thing has been the thing to read upon his death. But suicide is a taboo topic for the Victorian era, as it was seen as against God, because the belief was, oh, God's given you life, for you to take it away or to take away anyone else's life, that's you trying to almost get control and get power that's not yours to have. So this is why Jekyll doesn't say it explicitly. He doesn't say the word suicide. He just gives us lots of hints. And we see it in chapter 8. We know he has committed suicide there as well. And also, talking about self in third person. Maybe this shows the shame of all that he did. He now disassociates himself from not only the Hyde part, but the Jekyll part that made the decision to do this in the first place. Overall, this is a cautionary tale. Don't do science, no. Don't meddle with human nature and God's work. Because look what happens. You kill your friends and then you kill more people, and it's just a lot of death and sadness. It's a very unhappy ending. Lovely. And that is all. I hope you've enjoyed Jekyll and Hyde. I love this book. You know how much I love it. It's in my top 5. Also, the video's stopped now, but I just will say, have a lovely summer, everyone. I hope that it treats you well. Hope you have a good rest now and don't do any work. Do some reading. Reading's good for you. Stay safe, stay happy, and see you in September.